All right, let's jump right into it. Today, we're diving into the career of a true MMA legend, Bas Rutten.
Definitely a legend.
We all know about his incredible run in the UFC, the heavyweight championship, the unbeaten streak.
Oh, yeah.
But I think what's really interesting is his time before that in Pancrase.
Pancrase is really where he made his name, yeah.
So for people who might not know, what exactly was Pancrase? What made it different from, say, the early UFC?
Well, it started in Japan in the early 90s, founded by a couple of pro wrestlers,
Yep.
Masakatsu Funaki and Minoru Suzuki. And it was kind of a hybrid. It had this pro wrestling element to it.
Mm-hmm.
But the matches were real. They were really fighting, but with a very unique rule set.
What was so unique about it?
Well, the biggest thing I think that threw a lot of people off is that you couldn't punch to the head with a closed fist.
What? So how did they hit each other in the face?
You can use open-handed strikes, palm strikes.
Ah.
Kicks, knees, elbows, all that was legal.
I see.
But no closed fist punches to the head.
Wow, that's a pretty big difference.
It is, yeah. It really forced the fighters to be more creative, more technical, and it also kind of protected the fighters a bit.
Interesting.
Yeah, less chance of getting knocked out cold, which I think was part of their philosophy at the time.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So how did a guy like Bas Rutten, who came from a kickboxing background, how did he adapt to that?
It was a challenge for him at first, for sure. He was used to just blasting people with punches and kicks.
Right.
And suddenly he's in this environment where he has to be a lot more careful with his striking.
He had to think more.
Yeah, exactly. He had to think more, he had to be more strategic, and he had to learn how to grapple because a lot of guys in Pancrase were really good at grappling.
I was going to say, yeah, if you take away the punches, that really opens the door for takedowns and submissions, right?
Absolutely. That was the other big thing about Pancrase. They had this rule called the rope escape,
Right.
where if you got caught in a submission, you could grab the ropes to get a break.
Oh, interesting.
But it would cost you a point. So it was a way to keep the action going, but it also added this whole strategic element to the grappling.
I see. So you had to be really careful about when you went for a submission.
Exactly, because if they escaped, you'd lose a point, and that could cost you the fight.
So let's talk about Bas Rutten's actual Pancrase career. How did it all begin? What was that first fight like?
Well, his debut was in 1993, September.
Okay.
And he fought a Japanese fighter named Ryushi Yanagasawa, who was actually much bigger than him, like 45 pounds heavier.
Wow, that's a big difference.
Yeah, Rutten was the underdog going into that fight, but he came out like a house on fire, just blasting Yanagasawa with palm strikes, knees, kicks.
It's almost like they designed those rules for him.
Right.
Like, okay, no punches, but all this other stuff is okay.
Exactly. He was made for Pancrase, in a way.
Yeah, he just had to adjust a little bit.
Yeah, and he knocked Yanagasawa out in under a minute. It was a brutal, brutal knockout.
Wow, what a way to make a statement.
Talk about a first impression, right?
So did that set the tone for the rest of his Pancrase career?
I mean, he had a pretty dominant run overall, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. He actually lost his second fight.
Oh, really? To whom?
A guy named Takaku Fuke,
To...
who was a very experienced grappler.
I see.
And Rutten's ground game at that point was still pretty undeveloped.
Yeah, he was still learning.
Exactly. So Fuke took him down, nearly finished him with an armbar.
Oof, an armbar, that's a...
Yeah, nasty submission.
Yeah.
Rutten actually had to use a rope escape to get out of that one.
Oh, wow.
But he did eventually win the fight with a knee to the liver.
Ah, so that's where that started.
Yeah, that was one of the early signs of, like, okay, this guy can really hurt you with those liver shots.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And this loss, it must have been a wake-up call for him.
It was, yeah. He realized he couldn't just rely on his striking anymore. He needed to learn how to grapple, how to defend submissions. So he started training with Masakatsu Funaki.
Oh, wow. One of the founders of Pancrase.
Yeah, the guy who knew everything about grappling, especially this style called shoot wrestling.
Shoot wrestling? What's that?
It's kind of a hybrid, you know? It's got elements of catch wrestling, judo, submission grappling. It's all about realistic fighting, really taking your opponent down and finishing him on the ground.
I see. And Funaki was the master of that.
He was, yeah, one of the pioneers. So Rutten was learning from the best.
So he went from fighting a grappler to training with one of the best grapplers in the world.
That's how you learn, right?
Yeah, you got to dive right in.
Trial by fire.
And did he actually ever fight Funaki?
He did, in his third Pancrase fight.
Oh, wow. Talk about pressure.
Yeah, imagine fighting your mentor.
Right.
The guy who's teaching you everything. And Funaki actually submitted him with a toe hold.
Oh, a toe hold. That sounds painful.
It is very painful.
Yeah.
So Rutten's early Pancrase career was a
Bobby
bit
responds.
of a roller coaster.
It sounds like
Incredible.
ups and
A
downs.
knee
wins
and a
losses.
hard right
But
hook.
he's learning,
Knocks the chip.
He was getting better with every fight.
So that's what's important.
That's what matters in the long run.
He was evolving as a fighter.
Exactly. And that's what makes his story so interesting, I think. Because he didn't just come in and dominate right away.
Mm-hmm.
He had to work for it. He had to adapt. He had to overcome those early setbacks.
And that's what we love about him.
Exactly.
The heart, the determination.
Yeah, he's a true warrior.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
What happens next in his Pancrase journey?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. He starts racking up wins. He starts developing his signature style.
Okay.
He becomes known for those liver shots, for his ground and pound.
Right.
And he has this epic rivalry with Frank Shamrock.
Ah, Frank Shamrock. Yeah, I've heard about that.
That's a whole other story.
Yeah, we'll have to say that for next time.
Yeah, we'll dive into that in the next part of our deep dive.
That's good. I can't wait.
Me neither. So last time we left off with Bus Rutten kind of hitting a roadblock in his Pancrase career.
Yeah, that loss to Frank Shamrock, definitely a turning point.
It was. And it really exposed a weakness in his game, which was his ground game.
Yeah, Shamrock, I mean, he was known for his submissions.
Oh, yeah, he was a master of leg locks.
Especially
But Rutten at that point, he was still primarily a striker.
Right, he was still learning the ropes when it came to grappling.
So how did he address that weakness? Did he change up his training?
Absolutely. He knew he had to get better on the ground if he wanted to compete with the best in Pancrase.
Makes sense.
So he started training even harder, focusing a lot more on his grappling, his submissions.
And who was he training with at that time?
Well, he was still working with Masakatsu Funaki.
Okay, the Pancrase founder.
Right, the master of shoot wrestling.
Yeah, shoot wrestling.
It's a fascinating style, really.
Yeah, we talked about it a bit last time, but
Yeah, it's kind of like a mix of catch wrestling, judo, submission grappling.
very much focused on real fighting.
Exactly. It's not about looking pretty, it's about effectiveness.
And Funaki was one of the pioneers of that style.
He was, yeah. So Rutten was learning from the best. That's pretty amazing to be able to train with a guy like that.
It is, yeah, and it really shows Rutten's commitment to improving.
He wasn't afraid to seek out the best to learn from them,
Yeah, he had that humility, that willingness to learn.
which is essential, I think, for any athlete who wants to reach the top.
Absolutely. You got to be willing to put your ego aside and just learn.
So did we see the results of that training in his next few fights?
Oh, yeah, definitely. His grappling improved significantly.
Okay.
He was able to defend takedowns better. He was more comfortable on the ground.
So he wasn't just getting taken down and submitted anymore.
No, he was actually starting to threaten guys with his own submissions.
That's interesting. So he went from being a liability on the ground to an actual threat.
Exactly. And that made him a much more dangerous fighter overall.
Because now he could win the fight anywhere, standing up or on the ground.
Right, he was becoming a complete fighter.
And that's what you need to be successful in MMA.
Absolutely. You can't just be one-dimensional.
So after that loss to Shamrock, what was his next big fight?
Well, he had a rematch with Manabu Yamada.
Okay, Yamada, I remember him.
He's a tough fighter, very skilled grappler.
Yeah, and he had actually beaten Rutten before, hadn't he?
That's right. He had submitted Rutten in the 1994 King of Pancrase tournament.
Oh, wow. So this was a chance for Rutten to get some revenge.
It was, and he did it in spectacular fashion.
Tell me about it.
Well, they went to the ground pretty early in the fight.
Okay.
Yamada took Rutten down, but Rutten was able to work his way into a good position.
And what happened from there?
He caught Yamada in an arm triangle choke.
Oh, an arm triangle. That's
Yeah, it's a blood choke.
It cuts off the blood supply to the brain, right?
Exactly. And Rutten just squeezed, held on tight.
And Yamada had no choice but to tap.
Well, he actually passed out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, eyes wide open, just went to sleep.
That's a scary sight.
It is, yeah, but it was a huge win for Rutten.
I can imagine, yeah, to submit a guy like Yamada, who is known for his grappling.
It really showed how far Rutten had come.
His ground game was no joke anymore.
No, he was the real deal.
So after that win, he must have been feeling pretty confident.
Yeah, he was on a roll, racking up wins.
But was that rematch with Shamrock still looming in the background?
Oh, absolutely. Everyone was waiting for that rematch.
Yeah, it was the fight to make.
The fight that everyone wanted to see.
But when did it finally happen?
March 1995.
Okay, so about a year after their first fight.
Yeah, and the anticipation was through the roof.
I bet, yeah, everyone wanted to see if Rutten could avenge that loss.
Exactly. Could he finally solve the puzzle that was Frank Shamrock?
So how did it go? Did he get his revenge?
Well, not quite. It was actually a pretty short fight.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Shamrock took Rutten down pretty quickly.
Okay.
And he caught him in a knee bar.
A knee bar, that's another one of those.
Yeah, it's a leg lock. Very painful.
Yeah, I've seen those. They can do some serious damage.
They can, and Rutten had to tap out.
So Shamrock still had his number.
He did, at least for that fight.
But, even in a loss, I'm sure Rutten learned something.
Oh, absolutely. He was always analyzing his fights, looking for ways to improve.
That's the sign of a true champion.
It is, yeah, that constant desire to get better.
So 2 losses to Shamrock. Was he starting to get discouraged at this point?
I don't think so. I think it just fueled his fire even more.
Okay.
He was determined to prove that he could beat Shamrock, that he could be the best in Pancrase.
And did he eventually get that chance?
He did, but we'll have to save that story for the next part of our deep dive.
All right. We're on the edge of our seats here. I can't wait to hear how it all unfolds.
It's a wild ride, that's for sure.
So we left off with Bas Rutten at a crossroads in his career. 2 tough losses to Frank Shamrock.
Yeah, really close fights, but still, losses are losses.
Exactly. But he was still the king of Pancrase.
Right, he had that title to defend.
And he was still facing some of the best fighters in the world.
Absolutely. Pancrase was no joke back then.
So who did he fight next after that second Shamrock fight?
Well, he had a rematch with Ryushi Yanagisawa.
Oh, wow. The guy from his very first Pancrase fight.
Yeah, the one he knocked out in under a minute.
Right.
So this was a chance for Yanagisawa to get some revenge.
I bet he was looking for it.
He was. But Rutten was a different fighter now.
Yeah, he had evolved so much since that first fight.
Exactly. He was more experienced. His grappling was better.
And how did the rematch go?
Well, it was a lot more competitive than their first fight.
Okay.
Yanagisawa was able to take Rutten down a few times. But Rutten's ground game was solid now. He was able to defend himself.
So he wasn't getting submitted?
No, and he was actually doing some damage from the bottom.
I see. So he was a threat even when he was on his back.
Exactly. And in the end, he won the fight by TKO.
Oh, wow. So he beat Yanagisawa again.
Yeah, but this time it was a much tougher fight.
It shows how much Yanagisawa had improved, too.
Right, he was a top contender in Pancrase.
So Rutten was still at the top of his game.
He was, yeah. He was proving that he was the best in the world.
But he still hadn't beaten Shamrock.
That was the one that got away,
Yeah, it must have been frustrating for him.
I'm sure it was. But he had other challenges to focus on.
Like defending his King of Pancrase title.
Right, and he had some tough fights coming up.
Against Truck.
Well, he fought Maurice Smith again.
Oh, yeah. The kickboxer.
Yeah, and this time Rutten submitted him.
Really? So he was getting those submission wins now.
He was, yeah. He was becoming a complete fighter.
That's impressive to submit a guy like Maurice Smith.
It is, and it showed how much Rutten's grappling had evolved.
So he was really at the peak of his powers at this point.
Absolutely. He was the king of Pancrase. He was submitting world-class strikers.
And he was getting ready for that 3rd fight with Shamrock.
That's right, the trilogy fight.
Everyone was waiting for it.
It was the biggest fight in Pancrase history.
So when did it finally happen?
August 1995.
Okay, so a few months after that second fight.
Yeah, and the anticipation was incredible.
I can only imagine.
The whole MMA world was watching.
So how did it go? Did Rutten finally get his revenge?
Well, it was another war.
Okay.
Back and forth action, both guys giving it their all.
So it was close.
Very close. Shamrock was able to take Rutten down, control him on the ground.
Rutten's weakness.
Yeah, but Rutten was defending well. He was landing strikes from the bottom.
Keeping himself in the fight.
Exactly. And then something interesting happened.
What was that?
Shamrock got a cut above his eye.
Oh, from one of Rutten's strikes.
Yeah, it was a pretty bad cut.
So what happened? Did they stop the fight?
Well, the doctor came in to check on it.
Okay.
And he said that Shamrock couldn't continue.
Oh, wow. So Rutten won by TKO?
He did, yeah. Kind of an anticlimactic ending.
I bet. Yeah, after all that buildup.
But a win's a win, right?
That's right. So Rutten finally beat Shamrock?
He did, and he unified the King of Pancrase title.
So he was the undisputed champion.
The King of the Mountain.
And that was pretty much the end of his Pancrase career, right?
Pretty much. He had a couple more fights after that.
Okay.
But then he decided to move on to the UFC.
The next chapter.
Yeah, and that's a whole other story.
I bet. But I think we'll have to save that for another deep dive.
Sounds good to me.
Well, this has been incredible. Learning all about Bas Rutten's journey through Pancrase.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for sharing your expertise with us.
Anytime.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of early MMA. And be sure to check back for more episodes where we explore the history, the legends, and the evolution of this amazing sport. Until then, keep training, keep learning, and keep that fighting spirit alive.